Let people in.
Okay.
It is live. Oh, we already have 30 people on. So people are starting to come in. And yeah, we'll wait a little bit. We'll wait about another minute or two. We're up to about 65 attendees right now. Actually, that makes me happy. I thought people were going to register and not show up.
That's great, because New York's Winter Green Up Conference, which has been over the past 3 weeks, they were struggling to get more than 15, 20 people per virtual session. Fred Provenza probably drew a few dozen last week, of course, but
Wait just one more minute. So we're at just about 70 people in. And everyone have their water and everything. Cool. Okay, I think we can start. Looks like we're just shy about 10 people, but we're going to go ahead. And I just want to introduce myself. I'm Michelle Johnson. I'm the coordinator for Granite State Grazers. We are one of the partners who is presenting this winter learning series, and I want to welcome everyone here. Just to let you know, this is going to be recorded, and I will send it a link out within a week to all of the registration people who have registered. If you want to get a copy of the recording of future webinar series that we're putting on, register. We will be putting them on our Facebook page and our website, but I can't guarantee when they're going to be on. So if you want them sooner rather than later, register for all this webinars that you want to get the recording from. So I'm just going to say welcome to our inaugural webinar for our winter learning series, and I'm going to actually hand it off to Jess Williamson, the co-director of the Northeast Pasture Consortium, who is sponsoring today's webinar.
Well, thanks for having us, Michelle. As she said, I'm the co-director of the Northeast Pasture Consortium. If you've been with the consortium for years and past, you know that James Cropper was previously the executive director. He decided to retire last year. So I've been learning and taking over his position for the past year, and we're really looking forward to what the consortium is and is going to be into the future. So thank you all for joining us today. I'm sorry that I can't see your smiling faces face to face this year, but I have hope that we're all going to be back together in 2022 in the same room again. But thanks again for joining us today. So for this year, we would like to thank the Granite State Grazers and all of the other wonderful groups amongst the Northeast that's collaborating to bring you this winter learning series. Just a few little housekeeping Pasture Consortium notes. Because we don't have an in-person meeting this year, the executive committee has decided to not have our annual business meeting. So we had originally discussed maybe trying to have that virtually, because if you are a regular attender of the Northeast Pasture Consortium meeting, in-person meeting, you know that one of the largest sessions that we have is our annual business meeting, where we go through and we talk about the research priorities of the consortium. But because it probably would be pretty chaotic to try and do that virtually, what we've decided to do is to build a survey based on what the 2020 priorities are and based on where we want to go forward in 2021 and into 2022. So be looking in your email inbox if you are if you typically receive Northeast Pasture Consortium emails, because you will be getting one of those research priority email surveys. So we would really appreciate it if you could complete that. Please visit our website, which is grazingguide.net, for any announcements. But for this winter learning series, the Granite State Grazers website is going to be your hub for any of the Zoom links for the next several weeks coming up. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jen Colby. And she has a few more announcements. And Jen, if you could talk to them a little bit about the newsletter, as well as email addresses and how they can get on our mailing list and all of those things. So enjoy, and it's great to see you all, even if it's virtually.
Thanks, Jess. Hi, everybody. Jen Colby. I am with the University of Vermont and am the PI with the University of Vermont, houses the Northeast Pasture Consortium. And I will be joining Jess as a co-director starting likely in March. So we have initiated a new mailing list and newsletter that we're attempting to get out on a quarterly basis or an as needed basis. And if you go to the grazingguide.net website, you'll be able to find our contact information. You can also contact us directly to be added to that, which is neconsortium@gmail.com, or you can go to the grazingguide.net website. Those are all good. So thank you again so much for joining us. We're very excited as the Pasture Consortium to be able to kick this off, and I would love to pass it to our executive committee member and partner, Fay Benson, and our other partner, Brett Chedzoy, to lead our Silvopasture session. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jen. My name is Fay. Fay Benson. I've been working with Cornell Extension probably the last almost 18 years now. And this is my last year I'm going to be with Extension. And so I did 20 years of dairy farming before I came to Extension. I was one of the early adopters of organic dairying in 1996. And it's just been a great career. I mean, the 20 years of farming, along with 18 years at Extension, getting to see all the different farms and how people graze. And I've worked with Brett over the years since I began with Extension. And so I was really happy to do this project with Brett. Now I'm going to give you a little caution. I had trouble with the filming. I did it back in August, and the platform that I was editing on was crashed on me, and my new platform didn't really accept the video very well, but I think I've got it, so it's pretty good. So hopefully I can figure out to share. Hopefully, Michelle, you got to allow me to share my screen.
Okay.
I forgot about that, yeah. So we've all heard about the possibility that silvopasturing done correctly can be one of the highest forms of carbon sequestration for livestock production. And so my video is just kind of how Brett does it at his farm. And then Brett's going to follow up after the video with, kind of a technical talk about, the sequestration of it. So we're probably here we go. I got to get it so you have my sound. Give me a moment while I click on all my buttons here. This should take. Are we getting sound, Michelle?
I can't hear it right now. Remember what you did last night?
Yeah, I just did the same thing, I thought. So no sound yet. Are you seeing the picture though?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
There's a small speaker icon in the bottom of the video, Fay, and you may have to click on that on your own screen.
Oh, okay. Does that help at all?
No,
Oh, my goodness. We practiced this last night.
we really did.
Okay, well, I'm not surprised. Okay. Stop the share. So that's, one more try here. Any luck?
Yes.
Turn your volume up a little more, Faye, on your end.
Us about climate change and the damage we are doing to our planet, I was shown a new way to look at the problem, which made the solution so within reach. A solution that's right under our feet. I have shared this story with everyone I know, and now I'm going to share it with you. Climate change is not about too much pollution in our atmosphere, right? It's not our enemy. It's the building block of life. Everything a man was made of, it's us. And the solution is simply a matter of balance.
When European settlers first arrived in the Northeast, the land was covered by mature forest that was quickly changed to plantain use. This changed the soil by releasing the carbon in the organic matter. This video shows how one farm is seeking to bring the carbon back into the soil through silvopasture.
This starts the Silvopasture in the early 1990s. It was the most peaceful in Argentina. We have Silvopastures along the road from many of those ranches where they have great volcano, several natural forests and plantations. It's very similar system for the cattle plant, pumping road, and there's some fireways for what we have on this. The Silvopasture is also a way of doing lines for those ranches.
So Faye, people are having
Yeah.
trouble. People are having trouble hearing it. I'm trying to see. I've gotten some comments from some of the attendees with some suggestions.
Okay.
Do you have the speaker or the audio set to suppress the background noise?
Not that I know of. Show volume menu. Now I've got my sound is turned up all the way, but I'm wondering if there isn't another volume on them.
So I just took it off auto for suppressing background noise.
You
So
may need
sorry
to
guys, you guys are
yourself.
being really helpful. This is our first session and we're still working out the kinks, obviously.
Faye, you may want to mute yourself when you start the recording.
Oh, I could do that. Let's see. I think I've got to.
So Jason said to turn down the computer volume and turn up the video volume. And that we're only hearing it through the speakers on Faye's computer from Bill.
that any better? I did mute myself and then tried it.
We weren't hearing anything then.
Yeah, that must be it, that it's only picking up. See, I think it might have to be at your end, Michelle, when you set up the Zoom.
So I'm looking at my audio settings. I have the suppressed background noise to low instead of auto. And okay. In meeting option to turn on original sound. So is it playing right now? I can't see it.
I can, I'll go ahead and click it.
No.
Was that any better?
No. So we got a great comment from Jennifer. Maybe Mr. Benson can play the video and talk us through it.
Oh my goodness. Oh. You mean I provide the soundtrack?
Yeah, maybe add your comments to it. I don't.
That's a real shame. Let me just share computer sound. That's if that's what we got to do, I'll do it. Your call, Michelle. You want me to just talk?
Yeah, I think at this point we've pushed all the buttons in real time that we can, and I will research this after, but in order to keep the momentum going and keep everyone's attention.
I gotcha. It's a shame. So I'll do my best. I've obviously watched this thing about 10,000 times trying to edit it and try to get the fuzziness out of some of these pictures. But
About 40% of our 500 acres is in some type of silvopasture.
Whatever you just did and did undo, it was working.
are you saying you're seeing the video too?
No, we're not seeing the video. We're seeing you, but for about 5 seconds, it was perfect.
So I'm not sure what I did. Again, actually, I was just trying to get it. I have to mute this so I can't hear it.
So you're not sharing your screen right now.
Oh, gotcha.
Try playing it first, Fay, then share the screen. And then you can back up if you need to.
Start the video. Okay, I'm going to try it once more. Just
Pastures is we feel we have more diversity of things for
any sound at all?
It's perfect.
Yep.
Oh,
the
May want
animals eaten
to
here.
start it again.
In this silvopasture, we have
Do you feel hopeless about climate change and the damage we are doing to our planet? I did. But then I was shown a new way to look at the problem, which made the solution so obvious and so within reach. A solution that's right under our feet. I've been sharing this story with everyone I know, and now I want to share it with you. Climate change is all about too much carbon in our atmosphere, right? But carbon's not our enemy. It's the building block of life. Everything alive is made of it. It's us. The problem and the solution are simply a matter of balance.
when European settlers first arrived in the Northeast, the land was covered by mature forest. that was quickly changed to plant annuals. This changed the soil by releasing the carbon in the organic matter. This video shows how one farm is seeking to bring the carbon back into the soil through silvopasturing.
I was first exposed to silvopasturing in the early 1990s. I was in the U.S. Peace Corps in central Argentina. There, silvopasturing is a way of life for many of those ranches where they integrate their cattle with trees. Some are naturally occurring forests, some are plantations, and it's a very symbiotic system for them. The cattle play an important role in reducing fire risk because they have warm, dry winters. And the silvopasturing is also a way of doing more on the same land for those ranchers. Currently, about 40% of our 500 acres is in some type of silvopasture area. One of the reasons we like our silvopastures is we feel we have more diversity of things for the animals to eat in here. So in this silvopasture, we have the usual cool season grasses and forbs. We also have a lot of woody plants. When we move our animals into a fresh silvopasture paddock, we notice that they always like to spend the first 5 to 10 minutes nibbling on the woody browse. In here, this is a black locust and black walnut plantation that we converted into silvopasture. When we first started grazing this area about 15 years ago, I had a very heavy understory of invasive shrubs. Through a combination of grazing and mowing, we were able to rehabilitate it and bring it back into mostly grasses and forbs in the understory. We rely on piped water to all of our paddocks. We have 300-gallon tanks. Many are split between multiple paddocks like this one. And we use 1 1/4 poly pipe that we lay on top of the ground, usually under our perimeter fences. That's what feeds all of these tanks.
And what's the source?
We pipe water from a well at our house. It's a very productive well, about 15-gallon a minute well. We upgraded the pressure tank and pressure switch to have enough capacity to supply about 3,000 gallons of fresh water a day during the summer months. What we see in our silvopasture paddocks is that we not only have the same cool season grasses and forbs that are dominant in our treeless pastures, but we also have a mixture of woody plants. Some are native shrubs, most are some sort of invasive non-native shrubs, some are canes such as the raspberries and blackberries, and then we also have low-lying tree branches, so woody browse. But on average, our silvopasture paddocks have a broader mix of edible plants, and I think that benefits our animals because they can select from the things that best meet their nutritional needs. And it's fun and interesting to watch the animals when they move into a new silvopasture paddock because they typically go straight to the things that they are craving or that their brains are telling them to seek out, and it's often not the same plants that I would have expected them to first pick and choose from. We're grazing nearly 500 contiguous acres on our farm, and that's divided across 130 paddocks. We move the herd daily, and by our summer rotation, that means that we can give every paddock 3 to 4 months of rest. In a normal year, 2020 was not a normal year with the drought We had to shorten our rotation. We would like to graze our silvopasture paddocks 2 to 3 times during the active growing season in a normal year. And our summer rotation in our silvopastures lasts 4 to 5 weeks normally. So our drought tools is to try to build up our soil health as much as possible. That's a long-term process. Without healthy soils, your forages are just not going to stand up in a drought. If we don't get rain in the coming weeks, we're at mid-August now, the next 30 days are a critical time for growing forages back. If we don't get rain over the next 30 days and we have to start feeding hay early this year, we'll try to feed as much of that hay as possible inside our silvopastures. I'd like to feed hay in the silvopasture areas if it remains dry this fall, if we have to start feeding early, because we feel it'll help us manage the invasive brush and build up the forage base. The winter bale grazing really starts much earlier. The first thing we do is try to graze as long as we possibly can every year. And when our herd was a little smaller, we found that it was fairly easy to consistently graze for 8 full months. Here on this farm, every year, because we've been increasing the soil health, we feel that our average turnout date is getting a couple days, 2 or 3 days earlier every year. We used to be able to turn out by around the 20th to 24th of April, even in what seemed like the cold, wet springs. This year we turned out on April 12th. The previous year we turned out on April 14th. So despite some of the challenging spring conditions we've had in April, we seem to be peeling back the turnout date every year, which is very important because we feed about 8 round bales a day in the winter. That's what we expect to feed this winter at a value of $40 a round bale, and probably more realistically $50 a round bale. These are 4x5 900-pound round bales. That's if I can reduce 10 days of feeding round bales at 8 bales a day, 8 times 50, that's $4,000. So we can save ourselves hundreds of dollars a day for every day of grazing that we can maintain here. But we feel comfortable with this goal of being fully grazing by mid-April and try to graze until early to mid-December. If we push it beyond mid-December, typically we're getting some really poor ground conditions then, and that also seems to coincide with when we start getting a lot of snow accumulation, and snow accumulation that's freezing and thawing and creating very crusted conditions that are difficult for the animals to consume that stockpile. So we could do things that might extend the grazing season a little further. However, I don't feel it would be cost effective or practical in most years to extend our grazing season much beyond 8 months. Put up more hay than we anticipate needing because it's easier to find it now than it is in the late winter. And when we feed in the winter time, we will put either 1 or 2 days worth of hay in a given paddock, and we put different amounts in different paddocks so that if we feel that we're in like wet and soggy ground conditions, we can move the cattle more rapidly. If we have clean snow on the ground and frost in the ground, we might only move them every 2 days. 6 living barn areas. It's a 5-acre mixed pine and spruce plantation. We've thinned it out twice in the past. It needs to be thinned again. What we're really managing this for, though, is shelter for the animals during extreme winter weather. Experimenting with bale grazing about 13, 14 years ago. We were initially, and our herd was much smaller then. We were only feeding maybe 2 or 3 bales a day. We experimented using polyethylene ring feeders, and we found those were easy to move from one spot to another, but we didn't really notice any difference in the amount of hay that was being wasted. The other thing to keep in mind when bale grazing is that we're often feeding primarily first cutting hay, and if you look at all the stocky, weedy material that's in your typical first cutting hay, you wouldn't expect your animals to consume all of that material if it's out in the pasture, so I don't expect the animals to consume all of that when they're eating it in bale form. We've created some web-based resources for people that are looking to learn more about it. One is our Silvopasture forum. That's silvopasture.ning.com. Another place where people can find information on silvopasturing is on our forestry extension webpage. That's forestconnect.info. And we have a whole section on silvopasturing resources.
Well, it was took me a lot longer to make that video than I expected due to problems with the camera. Anyway, I won't even go into it. But sorry for the confusion in the beginning, but hope you have got an idea of how this works. And so, Brett, I guess I'm going to turn it over to you unless there's another comment. But why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Fay. I'm going to pull up my talk while I do that. If my volume is not or too quiet or too loud, please let me know. I've been playing with my volume here. So
No, you got the right volume. It sounds good.
Good. All right. So Fay was here in late August, and I know some of you that are further east experienced a really, really severe drought this summer, and we were in this tiny little bubble where we experienced probably the worst drought that we've had in the 20 years that we've been grazing here on the farm in New York. And it was just, we had like 3 inches of rainfall from early May till late September, and it really showed by the time Fay was here filming. So I was grateful that the resolution in the video, some parts of the video wasn't that great, because I was kind of embarrassed with the way things look. So now I get to give you the pretty picture version of silvopasturing, and we're going to run through this quickly here over about 15 minutes because Fay and I would like to leave time at the end for a group discussion on this and really talk about how do we move silvopasturing forward in this area. And as a bit of history, this is the 3rd opportunity that I've had to present at the Northeast Pasture Consortium, and I had to look it up last night, but I was actually over in Concord in 2012 to give a talk on silvopasturing as part of your annual meeting, and that actually led to us coming back that summer over in Keene and doing we called it a silvopasture field day at Dave Kennard's farm there, Wellscroft Fence, and some of you were probably there. So I'm going to assume that many of you, most of you, perhaps all of you have heard some of these talks before on silvopasturing. And today I want to focus a little bit more on the theme of the carbon benefits of silvopasturing. So you probably by now are guessing that I'm like some type of a livestock educator for extension or forage expert. I'm really not. I'm a regional extension forester. That's my main daily focus. I cover a pretty big swath of southern New York, And I also am the part-time manager of Cornell's large R0 teaching and research force. And that's where I think the whole discussion on silvopasturing really started about 20 years ago, where some of my colleagues, Peter Smolage, Tatiana Stanton, and a few others, did this 3-year project that was funded by Northeast SARE to look at the effectiveness and the feasibility of using goats, in this case, to control noxious understories. And the results of that study are on that one resource page that Fay mentioned, and I'll point out again at the end of this talk if you were interested in learning more about that study. But this study ended in 2002, and yet it lingered in the minds of many people that when I joined Extension a few years later, we were getting the frequently asked questions on, can I use my horses or my sheep or my cattle or my goats or pigs or whatever to go in there and deal with some of these vegetation management issues. And so in 2008, we decided to just let the cat out of the bag and start formally talking about silvopasturing and how to do it right. And my simple definition of silvopasturing is that we're basically growing quality trees and quality pasture together. And that's what really differentiates it from, just grazing cattle in the woods. And speaking of that, hopefully my little toolbar is not blocking that caption there, but we're all familiar with our long history of using our woodlots as sacrifice paddocks or areas where we stick the animals when the good ground is planted, or it's too hot or too cold, or the good ground is too soft and muddy. And so I just share these illustrations of examples of what silvopasturing is not. It's not where we just have a few scattered shade trees out there that cause animals to aggregate together. And it's certainly not these other images of unmanaged or passively managed woods. And you still see a lot of these farm woodlots with old barbed wire fences or woven wire fences around. And but the animals really aren't getting any benefit out of that. And when bored and restless and hungry animals are left in there for long periods of time, the trees certainly aren't getting any benefit either, especially not that high value hardwood tree in the upper left-hand corner. And silvopasturing is something that traditionally has been much more common in the southeastern U.S. and parts of the western U.S. and other parts of the world in coniferous forests. And if you mess up and your animals damage or kill a large pine tree, the economic loss is probably realistically like a few dollars from that. If your animals, on the other hand, girdle that nice oak tree there in the picture, that $100 oak tree or $200 oak tree now becomes a $2 piece of firewood. So one of the things that really distinguishes silvopasturing from woodland grazing is that it is synonymous with intensive rotational grazing. We're always keeping animals on the move, and that's how we avoid a lot of these negative issues associated with woodland grazing of the past. And you may recall in the video, it talked about how we are moving the animals across many paddocks on the farm. This is an aerial photo of just our home farm. We lease a few hundred contiguous acres, the green, the blue areas that you can see on the edges. But I put this image up there because you can see that on the 200-acre home farm, this is a fairly dated image, but even back 10 years ago when this was taken, you can see that it was already divided into 50 semi-permanent packs. And some funny little thing in the video there said that the white spots were bales. Those are actually the white spots you see here and you saw in that other image were where bales were fed that winter. So these pictures would have probably been taken in the spring, and you can just see how we're keeping the animals moving around. We're not feeding them in any one given spot all winter. Part of the reason that we never like to park our herd anywhere for very long is that if you look in the bottom part of that image, you see the it's actually the Watkins Glen State Park Gorge, and this is New York's second most visited park after Niagara Falls. And we have a mile of frontage on this park, and everything on the farm drains directly into that gorge that 2 million people come to visit every year. So we never wanted to be the farm that was doing a lot of nutrient loading in this very special watershed. So another thing that distinguishes silvopasturing from just woodland grazing is that we are very intentionally managing and manipulating the tree portion of the silvopasture in order to grow forages. And this is an example from our farm. I could share pictures upon pictures of other farms in this area that are doing similar projects, but if you're going to do silvopasturing where the trees are already there, and we can certainly be creating silvopastures by putting trees into our treeless pastures, but focusing for a moment on the putting pasture into the woods side of silvopasturing, if you look at the upper left-hand corner, kind of the before conditions, you can see we have a lot of nice looking trees. This was actually a pretty exceptional part of our woods, our farm woodlot. Most of our farm woodlot was dominated by invasive shrub understories when we started, and that was the impetus for us really to get into silvopasturing. And you see some trees there marked in blue. Those were trees that were marked for harvest. The picture in the upper right hand corner is shortly after the harvest was done. And you look at those trees that are marked for harvest and you're like, well, why would you cut those? Those are perfectly nice looking trees. And yeah, they are nice looking trees, but the trees around them are even better. But when you bring these trees out to the landing, put them in the log pile, you start to realize that these were not the young trees with great potential to grow and be productive in the future. These were the slower growing, suppressed trees. I'm not going to get into a lecture on even age forests today, but essentially these trees all grew up at the same time, and there were the winners and the losers, and we're taking out the losers. And when you see these on the landing, you realize that they have a lot of decay and defect in them, and that's just because they weren't vigorous, productive trees. So we did this harvest to create our silvopastures, and we actually made money at it. And but really the purpose of this harvest was to reallocate sunlight from all the trees growing there to just the best trees growing there, and use that other portion of the sunlight to then grow and maintain a forage base underneath. So I think of silvopasturing as really a choice between, do I want to grow firewood or do I want to grow forages in my woods? This picture is the same exact site just a few years later, once the forages are getting pretty well established. And commonly asked question is, well, how do you get the forages there in the first place? Do you have to seed them or something else? I think in many of our farm woodlots and farm plantations and old overgrown former farm fields, the seed bank is already there. So if we create the right conditions with more sunlight, the stuff will grow, the seed bank will express itself. There are certainly times and places where it makes sense to do some supplemental seeding, but you have to pay attention to all the critical things there, like good seed soil contact and moisture, and just picking the right weather conditions. This is a picture from a friend's silvopasture. He sent it to me last night, and I liked the picture so much that I just had to throw it in here today. But you can see there that he's doing his winter bale feeding in his new silvopasture. And that hay, of course, has a lot of viable seed plus a lot of fertility. So John is using this to inoculate his silvopastures. He did a great job this summer despite the drought to get forages already growing in there, and he had his flirt in there trampling in the seed that he had sown at different points. But he's at this point really relying more on the winter bale grazing in the silvopasture. And another thing that I'll point out about this picture is if you look carefully, you see these little remnant clumps of hemlock. John's a big wildlife lover, so he did that in part for wildlife habitat and also screening. He didn't want to be able to see all the way from one end to the other across 70 acres of his silvopasture, but he also realized that he might use this strategically for shelter during winter storms. And we've had quite the winter storm here the last 3 days. I think we're up to about 15 inches now, and probably expecting a lot more drifting over the next 24 hours. So once we get the forages, we've thinned the trees out, we got sunlight on the ground, we've got the forages started up, and then we have to manage the system where we're favoring the good and not favoring the bad stuff to just overwhelm the site again. So this requires periodically grazing at very high densities. We try to do this at least once during the summer rotation. But the truth of the matter is, and I'm sure many of you do high density grazing or mob grazing, but when you do this in a silvopasture system, it's even more challenging because you just have all these objects in the way. So you don't get that kind of equal hoof action across every square foot of the ground surface. In any place where the animals are not trampling and stepping, you're going to get the multiflora rose and the other noxious herbaceous and woody plants growing up. But we also need to let these pastures, these silvopasture paddocks, sufficiently recover. There's a little bit lower sunlight levels in here. The plants may take a little bit long to grow back and get to a mature state where they're ready to graze again. And that's where the rotational grazing part comes in. So you saw some pictures in Fay's video, but I want to really clarify what you were looking at here. And this term bale bombs, this comes from another forester grazer friend of mine, Joe Orifice, who is my counterpart over at Yale University now. Joe used to be part of our team here at Cornell. And I think it's a very descriptive term because we have to feed hay in the winter, so we're going to use it to our full advantage. And we like to go out and put these bales in the patches of soft remnant brush, the stuff that just quite hasn't succumbed yet to the other grazing management impacts. And not only when you put 20 hungry cows around a round bale like this in about a 30-foot diameter circle, if you do the math, you're creating about 1.5 million pounds of density per acre. And that's a density that's being sustained for several hours as the animals devour that bale. That's much, much higher than we can achieve just during the green portion of the grazing season. And of course, we're doing this when the ground has enough frost in it, or like early this fall, we had to start feeding hay early, but the ground was still very firm, and we were able to do a little bit of this bale grazing at that point. And not only did the animals just really trample and smash and put a beat down on the bad brush, but they also inoculate the site with lots of fertility and viable seed that's in this hay, and that helps create these little green oases of forages that further help suppress the return of the woody invaders. So here's just a very partial list of what we see as the benefits of silvopasturing tar farm. And I think these are all, if I had to pick one that was more important than the other, I would be challenged to do so. I think these are all important, and it's just an illustration of the symbiotic relationship here between the different components of the silvopasture system. But one of the things that Fay's video brought out is this last one here, the built-in resiliency. And I added this slide. This was actually from the summer of 2012, where we had another serious drought. It wasn't as bad as the one we experienced this summer, but these pictures were taken about a week apart. I remember it was 2012 because you can see the gangly dairy steers there that are photobombing the picture, but you can see that our treeless pastures are looking pretty rank and pretty burned up at that point. And yet shortly afterwards, they moved into our silvopastures, which we try to strategically hold for kind of the dog days of summer, the July and first half of August part of our grazing season. And the animals are up to their backs in lush green stuff, and they get to pick and choose what they really like there. So I want to kind of wrap this portion of the talk up and turn to something that's fairly new in terms of what we perceive as a benefit of silvopasturing, and that is, how much carbon can we really capture with this grazing system, especially compared to other land-based strategies for sequestering carbon. Most, if not all of you, have probably heard of this book, Drawdown, and it's a ranking of, I think it's like the top 70 or 80 strategies to capture more carbon. And surprising to me, because I think like sometimes not too many people have ever heard of silvopasturing, but surprising in a pleasant way, silvopasturing ranked number 9 overall in these strategies, and it was ranked well ahead of the other land-based, so like cover cropping or so what we generally think of as like the regenerative ag strategies or sustainable forest management. And this wasn't just one author, pulling numbers out of the air. These recommendations were come up with or developed by panels of scientific experts. And yet, so that picture there, I'm holding a chunk of soil, topsoil in my hand that I picked out of one of our silvopastures. And when you look at that soil there, that really, to me, shows how silvopastures, and not that we couldn't see the same rich organic soils in any well-managed pasture or even well-managed cropland, but you got kind of the best of both worlds there, where you've got the tree roots and the herbaceous plant roots and the grazing action of the animals. I think that the soil health characteristics of silvopastures can just be really, really exceptional because of all that plant diversity and everything that's going on. So I want to close up here by posing to the group this question, and that is really, what is the potential for silvopasturing in the Northeast? Because we've been now doing these types of talks for about a dozen years, and we're really trying to move beyond just getting you aware of this and telling you all the cool things about silvopasturing, and really thinking about, how do we really make this kind of a mainstream thing on the landscape. So these are the best figures that we've come up with to date here in New York, and I think they're defensible figures, so I couldn't point you to a single publication that has these facts and figures in there. But we're estimating in New York alone that we have 3 million acres of farm woodlands and reverting farmland. And I'd like to point out that when we really talk about developing our farm woodlands into silvopastures, we're not really aiming for that beautiful, pristine woodlot. We're really talking about the farm woodlot that's been cherry picked over for decades, and it's really lost its productivity, and it's just growing a lot of invasive shrubs in the understory, and you couldn't make it any worse. So silvopasturing is an opportunity to rehabilitate it and make it better. And then, of course, we have, and this is from one of the Cornell Small Farms publications, 3 million acres of, and I don't know exactly what they mean by underutilized grasslands and pastures, but practically any pasture you could be managing as a silvopasture if you just figure out a cost-effective way to put trees into it. And if you're piqued, if I've piqued your interest today in silvopasturing, I just want to point out these were on the end of Fay's video, but we have been compiling anything that seems relevant and useful, including some of these, I think, are what are useful exercises, like this evaluating the potential of a site for silvopasture development, sort of a thinking it through exercise, the silvopasture management plan template that we put together with some of Jen Colby's colleagues and Joe Orifice at Yale a few years ago. These are on our forestry extension page there. You have to dig for them a little bit once you get there. We also have this very technical guide to silvopasturing in the Northeast. And then, of course, the Silvopasture Forum that has about 500 members on it today. If you sign up for this forum, even though we know you're not going to get on it every night and post all your learning curve and stuff. It's good because when we do major events, I can message the forum members. So this might only be a handful of times a year, but you won't miss out on something. And one of the things on the calendar now is to do a 2-day tour of the silvopasturing operations down our way. It was going to be early this coming June, but I think that because of the inability to put people on tour buses, we're going to have to postpone it yet again. So sign up on the forum and you won't miss out. So I'll leave this pretty picture here. And I think what I'd like to do is have Fay unmute, Michelle, Jen, and we can maybe go through the chat box one by one. I'm fine with people if they want to unmute and ask their questions directly. This picture, by the way, of this silvopasture here, if you had looked at this area 10 years before, it was nothing but dense invasive brush underneath. And you can see what the silvopasturing has left us with today. So
I think Michelle was going to read through the questions. Is that right, Michelle?
Yeah, Brett, I sent you in the chat. So Sarah asked, are the tops left intentionally after harvest or just no incentive to remove them?
the tops so I'm working my way down through the chat box here. So did you say tops, Michelle?
Yeah.
The tree tops?
Yeah.
So in the forestry world, we call the treetops slash, so all the debris that's left over after any type of tree harvesting. And the slash management is very important when you're trying to develop a silvopasture, because every little branch and top you leave on the ground is just one more impediment to shelter the weeds and brush that you don't want really getting a foothold in your silvopasture. So ideally we would do what we call whole tree harvest and try to take out most of the tree. You never get 100%. And in some parts of the Northeast, that's possible. In other areas, we just lack the chip markets and the markets for the really low quality, low value material. If you can't remove much of the slash, the next best thing is to try and pile and consolidate it, or these are things you can do at very low cost. The high cost options are to go in with something like a Fecon or a Brontosaurus afterwards and chew it up. But you can't leave big brush piles or big piles of slash all over your silvopasture, because the animals just won't be able to pick their way through it very well, and you'll wind up with an understory of honeysuckle and multiflora rose.
So Jason asked, can you give an idea of how much longer silvopasture paddock should rest? He likes to go at least 45 days in a normal session on open ground, a normal season, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Jason should already know the answer to this question. He's baiting me here. So the longer the better, obviously. And in a normal year, as the video said, we might only graze a silvopasture paddock 2 or 3 times throughout the normal growing season. That is kind of the April to late fall period. But this summer, we definitely fell into that situation of untoward acceleration, and we were really pushing it towards the end there to have a 45-day rest period. But that rest and recovery, again, it's not just important to get the plants fully recovered. It's also, that's how we kind of minimize these issues of past woodland grazing, of too much soil compaction. The beauty of having this as part of your rotational system is that the ground conditions are poor. You just bounce them in a different direction. You come back to the silvopasture once the heavy rains have passed. And but trees can handle acute impacts. Like if you go in there and just tear it up really bad and a tropical storm moves through the area, trees, it didn't help the trees, but it really didn't hurt them either. But if you do that all the time, the issue with trees is that you might not know that you really damaged them until a decade or more down the road. And at that point, it's too late for them to recover. It's different than your pastures. You be up on your pastures, you see very quickly that you push the envelope too far, and you can then back off or fertilize or reseed or do something to help your pasture bounce back. You can't do that with the trees in your silvopasture.
So Amy asked a few questions. The first one is, how do you make money from the damaged trees you removed?
So we're not removing damaged trees. We're removing think of it as like the weeds in your garden. So think of silvopasturing as like going in and pulling out most of the weeds and leaving the vegetable plants. That's what we're leaving behind in our silvopastures. And of course, when we pull the weeds out, more weeds grow back because we disturb the site and we let more sunlight reach the soil surface. And the same happens in a silvopasture too. So these trees, even the weed trees, usually have value. So you don't get rich off selling your weed trees, but we make enough money. I think there's opportunities usually to at least break even. And a point that I usually make in the long version of these talks is that really, if you're going to do more than the few acres of do it yourself to learn, you probably really want to work with a independent consulting forester. And fortunately, we do have independent consulting foresters throughout pretty much the entire Northeast. Not everyone is well versed in silvopasturing, but they don't have to be, because their job is to help you accomplish your objectives. So, and we're always happy to have conversations with your forester if they're kind of struggling on what they might need to do a little differently in a silvopasture harvest versus just a normal timber harvest.
So her next question is that she just begun managing 174 acres of pasture, and then the rest is forest. It's very hilly. She can work through your potential for silvopasture, but what are the main characteristics that impede silvopasturing new forest?
So we often get asked, like, can you do it on this site or that site? And is there such a thing as too steep or too wet? Or I think any place where you can grow decently productive forages and trees, you can do silvopasturing. The bigger question though is, is the site inherently productive enough to give you enough return on your investment? So if I'm doing this on a very marginal site like the Tramp Rock Ridge or the marginal wooded wetland, it's going to cost a lot of money to build the fences, put in the water system. You're going to be investing time to go out there and thin the trees out and do all these other things. You want to make sure you get enough grazing days out of that to pay back the investment.
Okay, and last but not least, she would love to read very current research papers on silvopasture. Do you have any papers you recommend or researchers?
So there's research papers and then there's the everything else papers. And we use that Silvopasture forum to archive anything that gets published or gets written that we think would be applicable to grazers such as yourself in the Northeast region. So if it exists, it's probably on the forum, or it's also on our forestry extension page. It really just depends on whether it's more of like a chatty article like the ones I've written for Graze magazine, or if it's really more of a research publication. But that's where I would start to look. So I should say though that there really hasn't been much applied research on silvopasturing done to date in the Northeast. Finding funding to do this has been very elusive, and all the work we've done on the extension side has really been an extracurricular activity so far. So that's why I was excited to talk today to the Pasture Consortium, because I think many of you in the audience are the people that can, think about how we can do more of this research to figure out things like forage species and varieties that do best in light shade, you know, what are the stocking densities, both of trees and livestock? I can think of an endless list of research questions. Everything today has been more building on the research that's been done elsewhere and trying to extrapolate it here, and then anecdotally evaluating what seems to be working.
So, okay, I think this last question is from Cynthia, and it's long, so bear with me. Is there an organization that a farmer could tap into to determine how to go about developing a plan to create a productive silvopasture system? Her goals are climate and environmental, invasive control, better delivery of nutrition for the herd.
Yeah, so my second or third to last slide, I put two little screenshots on there. One was of this site evaluation exercise. The other was this template. And the template we developed really so that if you were working with a grazing specialist, like from NRCS, or maybe it's your local grazing association or soil and water, or other professionals like a professional forester, that template is really to guide you in all the things that you want to consider. And not that every bullet in that template is something that needs to be answered in a good plan. It's going to be very farm specific, but the template is just that. It was something that we wrote thinking, okay, here's normally what we would consider all the important issues that have to be addressed if you're really going to do silvopasture. And it's a fairly long template, by the way, but that shouldn't scare people off from reading through it, because you'd realize a lot of the same stuff would go into a good grazing plan or a good forest management plan. So I'm not sure if I answered Cynthia's question in full. I'm kind of reading it again here, but yeah, so one thing that Cynthia mentions is that the local county forester requires a plan to be removed from the state's current use program. One of the kind of screwy things is that practically every state in the Northeast has some sort of farmland tax abatement program. In New York, we actually have two. We have one for woodlands and one for farmland, which really muddies the waters when you start talking about these hybrid agroforestry systems. But I know Vermont has the current use, Pennsylvania has its cleaner and greener, and we've been having a lot of conversations with the state agencies in these states. And I know Kate McFarland from the National Agroforestry Center is kind of leading an effort now to document what are the, for lack of a better term, let's call them the legal impediments to silvopasturing. But it's not an issue that's going to get fixed quickly and overnight in every state, but it really starts with educating the forester, the tax assessor, that you know, really what are you doing? What is silvopasturing? New York added it to its ag assessment language 5 or 6 years ago, which has helped. So now we can be treating silvopastures as agricultural land instead of just woodland.
So Brett, I'm not sure if you can see in the chat, but there are a lot of other questions that have popped up. I don't want to waste time reading them out loud if you can see them.
Let's see, open. It's funny, I'm only seeing down to Cynthia's.
Oh, in the chat, not the question and answer.
Oh, chat. Where is the chat box? Here, I'll find it. Oh, chat 25. Okay, so I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay on for as long as I know some of you have to go dig out of the snowstorm and do a lot of other important things today, but I'd be happy to just keep reading down through these and talking about them. And Fay, you're not completely off the hook here, so you.
I think you're doing a great job, Brett. The one thing I might ask, Michelle, is there a way to copy all these questions? Because I think that'd be something that could be used later on.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. And what I'm also going to do is take all the links and everything that's been suggested and put them in the email that everyone, all the attendees will be getting afterwards with the links to this video. I can copy all the questions and I can send them to Brett and Fay and maybe they can answer them.
Oh, I guess I was just thinking for future use of like when you're writing grants, to show, interest in a topic.
I can do that too.
That's what I was
Absolutely.
thinking of.
And on my first slide, I have my email there, and I'm not hard to find online. And on my emails, I always respond. My cell phone is on the signature. I welcome people to reach out to me on any of this, but I'll warn you now that if it sounds like it's going to be a really in-depth conversation, I usually try to move it over to the Silvopasture forum, because one of the reasons that we created that forum is so that we could really archive the kind of the brass tacks conversations, so that it's there for us to refer back to and others to read and learn from. So, I mean, I won't post something there without somebody's permission, but if I say, let's switch over here and do this in the forum. So
Brett, let me just ask a couple quick questions that are in this chat that I think are unique and different. You've covered a lot of things already, but what about multi-species grazing? Does that work well in silvopasture?
So I'm a big fan of multi-species grazing. I just like people to understand what the hidden costs are to it, in terms of maybe having to upgrade your fencing and maybe pay a little bit more attention to adverse weather like we've experienced here recently. But you saw the one picture there from John Burns of Silvopasture, and he's managing his sheep and cattle in a single flurd pretty much year round. I guess I could go on and on about, again, I'm a forester, but somehow I always end up getting to talk about grazing, which I absolutely love to do. But I teach an online grazing course for the Cornell Small Farms program, and one of the whole sessions we cover is like multi-species grazing. So, and that made me think of something else that is often asked, and that is, is one livestock species better than another? I think you can do silvopasturing with any livestock species, but some may be a better fit than others at different stages in the life cycle of a silvopasture. So on the forum, we have some good case studies from places like the Stone Barn Center in the Lower Hudson, or Forks Farm, that's John Hopkins in Central PA. So like in the early stages, John Hopkins, for example, might use his pigs to go in there and get the scarification and deal with the Japanese stilt grass, but then he kind of follows it with sheep and then eventually cattle. That's sort of the life cycle of his silvopastures, until he gets something that looks like this picture here of kind of a well-established sward of forages.
One last one that I think is a little different is, do you ever burn the slash inside the forest?
So I don't see any reason why you couldn't. And, the nice thing about slash is it's going to break down over time. And as it's breaking down, it gives a refugium for all the other little forest critters and fungi and everything else. So I wouldn't be too quick to try to get rid of all the slash unless it was really taking up a pretty big footprint, or it became a shelter for all the really noxious stuff to grow up through. And we, in the early years, as we were trying to clear out the bad brush, we were doing it with dozers and excavators, pushing it into piles, and we tried to burn those piles. Many of you have tried that before and know it's easier said than done. And those piles over time became like these little islands of really nasty looking invasive shrubs. So that taught us to stop disturbing soil when we didn't have to, and don't push things into piles that are going to take forever to break down. But I some of these other friends that have been putting in pretty large silvopastures on their farms, they deal with it in different ways. They try to remove as much as they can, but the rest of it, they either try to crush it down enough that the animals can graze over it from the beginning, or they try to consolidate it into windrows and piles.
I think you've covered most of these other ones here. And like you say, there's opportunity on the website to ask more questions. And I'm just really grateful for the interest in this topic, and really grateful to Brett for being a resource here that's local in the Northeast for us to learn from.
Yeah, and so those of you that are on the extension and research and agency side of things, I would like to encourage you to go out and, write the grants or write the grant proposals, rather, look for the funding, look for the support to help grazers do more of this, because we have so much of this underutilized land that would just make great silvopastures. And I don't wait for me to make it happen. Fay already said he's retiring soon, and I don't get to retire right away, but between taking care of the farm, and Cornell gets the first 50 hours a week, and as a forester, I love this stuff, but I'm not going to be the person you're reading about doing all this groundbreaking applied research in silvopasturing. So the ball is in your court.
That sounds like a good way to end it. So Michelle, I guess over to you, or Jess, or.
I think Jess had to take off, so let me thank everyone for attending. Let me thank Brett and Fay and the Northeast Pasture Consortium for putting this wonderful webinar on. I've gotten a lot of messages that people have found a lot of value in today's webinar, and almost as far in as we are, we still have only lost about 10 people. So I think that's a win. And thank you all for your patience at the beginning while we fixed the bugs. Please join us next Wednesday at 12:30 for the Northeast Pasture Consortium. Again, we'll be presenting equine grazing. You can find the registration on the Winter Learning Series on our Facebook page, or you can go to www.grazenh.com, where we have links to all the webinars in this series. And thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah. Go dig out that snow.
Yeah.
Yeah, the neighbors are waiting on me here. So thanks, Faith. Thanks, Michelle. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, Brett.